Tonight, divisions at the heart of government. Keir Starmer fails to deny cabinet splits over his handling of the Mandelson vetting scandal.
The cabinet is working really hard on a huge amount of issues.
We'll be hearing from a former Labour MP who wants the Prime Minister investigated for potentially misleading Parliament. Plus, the UK strikes a £660 million deal with France to help stop the boats. And the government reveals that the medical data of 500,000 Brits is now for sale on a Chinese website. We'll pick it all apart with Ollie Grender and Michelle Donlan, who'll be with me for the next hour. It is Thursday. I'm Matt Barbet, live from Westminster. This is the Politics Hub. Good evening. They say it is pretty lonely at the top, and Keir Starmer is looking increasingly isolated right now, with some of the most senior members of his cabinet publicly distancing themselves from his decisions over Peter Mandelson. Today, he failed to deny there is a split in the cabinet, preferring to avoid a direct answer to the question. The Home Secretary, though, Shabana Mahmood, is one of those who's reported to have questioned whether it was justifiable to sack the Foreign Office Chief Ollie Robbins and then praise him as an outstanding civil servant. She said today it was a judgment from the Prime Minister. That's subtly different from it was the right thing to do, isn't it? We'll hear from her and the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, in a moment. But first, here is the Prime Minister.
The cabinet is working really hard on a huge amount of issues and what we're delivering at the moment. We're preparing for the King's speech and all the further measures that we're going to need to take the country forward. And of course, the issue we discuss at cabinet a lot in recent weeks is the war on two fronts, the ongoing war in Ukraine and the developing situation in Iran. What we discuss at cabinet is the international aspect of that, but also the domestic impact in relation to that and the measures that we need to take to ensure that we're assessing the risks and making sure we're protecting people in this country from those impacts.
What we saw yesterday was the Prime Minister redacting bits of Sir Ollie Robbins' evidence to make it sound like he was supporting him. So he has misled Parliament again. He did not follow full due process. He misled Parliament on that. And a lot of MPs, including his MPs, are beginning to worry. His cabinet ministers are briefing against him. What we're seeing is a Prime Minister in trouble at a time when he needs to be focused on domestic issues, like I am, talking to people who are running an oil refinery who are worried about our sovereign industrial capacity.
Let's bring in now our chief political correspondent, John Craig. John, look, he may be looking isolated. Is he isolated?
Increasingly so, yes. It all turned, really, on Tuesday. First of all, we had Ollie Robbins' evidence at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. While that was going on, the Cabinet was meeting. They had a political cabinet as well, where the civil servants are not present. And by all accounts, there was quite strong-ish criticism of the PM about two things, really. One, the sacking, the brutal, abrupt sacking of Ollie Robbins on last Thursday night. And secondly, generally deteriorating relations between ministers and civil servants, which all the mandarins say, oh, you can't have good government if you're not getting on with the civil service and so on. They would say that, wouldn't they? But the ministers who we believe spoke out included the Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, and, perhaps surprising, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, we all regarded as a loyalist. Let's have a little listen to what Shabana Mahmood's been saying today. She was over in France signing a new deal on small boats and so on. This was Shabana Mahmood on the whole issue of the Robbins sacking.
I do think it was a mistake that the results of the vetting and what that might have meant for the appointment of Peter Mandelson weren't shared with the Prime Minister, particularly after these matters had begun to come to light and he was giving, making statements in Parliament and in the media as well. But really, it's a judgment for the Prime Minister. In the end, he's been intimately involved in these discussions with officials all over government, including at the Foreign Office. And I do think, if you've lost the confidence of the Prime Minister in these circumstances, then it is very difficult to continue in your job.
So it's a judgment for the Prime Minister, not I agree with the Prime Minister. That was similar. Pat McFadden said something very similar on Sky News this week, and we've seen actually a number of ministers in interviews this week be lukewarm at best and perhaps not terribly supportive of the action. Clearly, the support for the Cabinet is nothing like as strong as it was. Is the Cabinet about to crack? Are we going to see Cabinet resignations like, for example, when Boris Johnson went? You'll remember this. I remember being in Parliament when, first of all, it was Sajid Javid, wasn't it, about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and about half an hour later, Rishi Sunak went, and that was the beginning of the end for Johnson. Are we going to see one or two Cabinet ministers now resign, and possibly, of course, I mentioned Wes Streeting. He's seen as a potential leadership contender, of course.
That's right.
Ed Miliband, I mean, some of his comments this week have not been terribly supportive either. So
we said prime ministers are just human beings and they make mistakes.
Yeah, not terribly helpful, is it?
Honest. I mean, some people thought that was perhaps a bit too much honesty. John, thank you very much indeed. Well, you were pointing to Michelle Donnellan, who's one of our guests, former Conservative minister, and also we're joined by Liberal Democrat peer Baroness Ollie Grenda. Good to see you both. Why don't I finish what John started, Michelle, because you would have seen this kind of thing close up, and when you're in that group and people are starting to look at each other and wonder about what they're saying and choose their words, as Shabana Mahmood seems to be doing very carefully, then, well, the game's up, isn't it?
I think so. I felt like it was a turning point this week. And there is a marked distancing that ministers and senior figures within the Labour Party are doing. And like you say, they're carefully choosing and articulating their words to give themselves riddle room under the premise that when Starmer is gone in a few weeks' time, they've got those words to fall back on and to be able to give themselves a bit of distance. And I think it is obviously in their interest, though, to keep him for the local elections. They need somebody to be the fall guy and then to have a reset moment. And when you think about it, how can he possibly survive? We have those local election results. All the polling shows it is going to be catastrophic for Labour. And that will then be coupled with this massive error in judgment and the fallout that has been drip after drip after drip. And we've got another tranche coming out after Easter as well. It's just not going away.
We will go through more of the detail of the Cabinet in a minute. It may be catastrophic for Labour. It may not be brilliant for either Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats as it happens.
What, the local elections will be OK for us.
There are two other parties who seem to be grabbing some of that polling, but we'll leave that there. Look, Ollie, what's your take on... Well, not just what we've seen today from government ministers and what we hear from the likes of John, who have got their ear, but also what we've seen the past week. I can't believe it's a week, actually, since he sacked Ollie Robbins. But what's your take on it?
Well, I think... So, leadership of a political party is a bit like playing chess, but it's on a 3D board and it's wobbling all the time. And when you protect the king on the chessboard by losing every other piece around the king becomes very exposed on a chessboard, and that is what we're seeing now.
Yeah.
You know, he's lost all the people it's possible to sack to say there's a reset and a recast, and so he is absolutely standing alone on this chessboard. I think is the way to visualise it, and it makes it very difficult.
Look, either way, it's a gambit,
also it just makes it very, very difficult because, you know, the absolute cowardly resort of most people in a political party is to say it's all the people around the leader. But leaders take decisions and leaders lead. And so, you know...
The buck stops there, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Thanks for the moment. Let's have a word now with Carl Turner, who is still a member of the Labour Party, but lost the whip in Parliament last month, I think, Carl, wasn't it, for... Well, what was it for? Why don't you tell us?
It was for my opposition to the jury trial curtailment, which I thought was a terrible idea, the most ludicrous policy decision that any party of any political persuasion could have ever mustered, in my view. Yeah. Even Robert Buckland, the former Lord Chancellor, when he had every excuse in the pandemic, resisted the very idea on the basis that it was unjust. Our own leader, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, campaigned between 1997 and 2007 to scrap single-judge trials in Northern Ireland, yet wants to bring them into England and Wales. I find it ludicrous, and that's what got me this suspension.
And now, though, you want Keir Starmer investigated. People will wonder, you were suspended, you want the investigation. Is it sour grapes?
Well, I'm not holding grudges, but what I do tend to think is people should be challenged and integrity is important. And the reality is, I think the Prime Minister gave evidence to the Prime Minister's questions last Wednesday, whereby he suggested strongly that Ollie Robbins was not under any pressure from his office. And that's not the evidence that Robbins gave to the Select Committee the previous day. But let me just start with a bit of an apology, because I've had to write to the Speaker today to apologise for an admin error, because my office posted on social media correspondence between myself and the Speaker of the House of Commons. That's against the conventions of the House. But let me tell you this, nobody's been sacked. I've taken that on the chin.
Yeah, well, it hasn't started well then, if that's how you decided to tell the Speaker.
Well, exactly. But I mean, look, I'm just making a point of the fact that I take responsibility and I don't sack people when it goes wrong.
Sure, but I guess it also shows that people make mistakes, don't they?
Well, they do indeed. That is true as well. So I'm not suggesting the Prime Minister has deliberately misled Parliament. I don't think he's that type of guy. He's a friend of mine. I know him well. I was in his private quarters in Downing Street a few months ago trying to persuade him to sack Morgan McSweeney. So him and I have had a good relationship. The reality is we've fallen out recently over policy. But I don't...
With that in mind, Carl, and whatever happens next, because you're asking for the Privileges Committee to examine if he misled Parliament. I mean, events may overtake that. Do you think he should go now? Do you think Labour, whether you're in it or not, or certainly when it comes to the whip, do you think Labour needs a new leader now?
No, I hope not, actually. I don't want the Prime Minister to resign. I hope that he can survive this. But what I do want him to do is improve and get a grip of things. When Morgan McSweeney left Number 10, I was under the impression that things would improve dramatically. Unfortunately, things have got probably worse than they ever were. And that's a big problem. You know, he's got to start listening to people in the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Maybe the problem, Carl, was he was listening too much to Morgan McSweeney. Maybe he listens to too many people and perhaps doesn't make his own decisions. That's certainly what a lot of the commentary has been across the board in the past couple of days.
Well, my accusation to the Prime Minister was always that he was over-reliant on these advisers, because the reality is Keir Starmer has not got much politics about him. That's my view of him.
Yeah.
I don't think he's terribly political, actually. I think he's got good intentions, but I don't think he's the most political of politicians. And the idea of sacking Ollie Robbins, right, must have been the biggest act of political self-harm anyone ever saw. It was just unbelievable. You saw what his evidence was. Everybody was left thinking, what on earth did he sack this guy for?
I mean, he could have told him what was in the vetting, couldn't he? He could have done that. I mean, sure, it wasn't the convention necessarily, but he wouldn't have necessarily broken the rules if he had told the Prime Minister, who probably knows plenty of other secrets.
Well, he could have done. But look, we're expected to believe that the first the Prime Minister heard of this was Tuesday last week. You know, that's the truth of it. The Independent ran an article months ago suggesting the very thing. I mean, come on. You know, I don't read The Independent often enough, but if I was the Prime Minister, I'd have several hundred staff saying, hang on a minute, Prime Minister, have a butcher's at this. What do you think?
Carl, let me just sum up a lot of what you said and come back with one of my questions for a second time. He's not very political, but he's the Prime Minister. It certainly sounds like he's not curious enough if this was all out in the public domain before Tuesday last week. So why do you think, when you haven't even got the whip, why do you think he should remain as Prime Minister with all that in mind?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, he was elected with a mandate from the electorate, a big, fairly sizable majority, the second biggest majority we've had since 1997. So that entitles him to be the Prime Minister and lead the country. The second point is, which is the most obvious one, who's going to replace him? I don't want the job. I want to have it gift wrapped 24 hours a day, non-stop. You can't go to the toilet without a police officer being with you. You know, who wants the job, frankly? But the reality is, we've got to get our act together, because these elections are going to be shocking in May. And people like me are going to come back to Parliament, whether I've got the whip or not, and they're going to be looking at their own seats and saying, what's my chance? Is the P45 for me already in the post? And let me tell you, for the very vast majority of us, it is. We're going to lose our seats. Huge numbers. We'll be down to 100 MPs if we carry on in this way. So we've got to do something. I'm hoping the Prime Minister can get his act together and deliver for the country and stop messing around with daft ideas, ludicrous suggestions about doing away with jury trials. What a load of nonsense.
Yeah,
Just deliver the policies that you promised to do in the manifesto.
Yes, we know you're not a fan of that one. Look, a week is a long time in politics, so it's an awful long time to the general election. Before we say goodbye to you, Carl, do you think you'll get the whip back? Plenty of others have been brought back in from the cold, haven't they?
Well, I'm not doing my best to try and get it back out.
No, perhaps not.
And I'm not, I'll tell you what I'm not going to be doing. I'm not kowtowing and saying I'm awfully sorry about having this thing about the jury stuff. It was a terrible mistake, but I've woken up this morning and do you know what? What a great idea that is. It's a ludicrous idea. It's utterly balmy. No government should ever consider such a stupid idea.
We will save the discussion on that one, if it comes back, by the way, for another day. Carl Turner, MP, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
John is still with me. What do you make of that, John?
Well, I don't mean to be rude, but they used to call John Prescott, when he was MP for Hull East, the mouth of the Humber. And Mr Turner is pretty outspoken too, isn't he? I mean,
that's an understatement.
He doesn't mince words at all. It is bizarre, actually, that he's very critical of the way things are operating, but he doesn't want the Prime Minister to go.
Yeah.
I suspect he feels, as some MPs feel, some Labour MPs, that the options, I won't say alternatives because there's more than one alternative, the potential candidates are potentially worse than Sir Keir Starmer. There are those who don't think that Angela Rayner is ready for the job. Andy Burnham's not in Parliament. There are those who don't want Wes Streeting. And so there is no... It's not like, for example, Blair Brown. Brown was the obvious successor to Brown.
Yeah.
And you've had in other political parties an obvious successor. That, I suspect, is the reason why he doesn't want the PM to go. And of course, the other argument, of course, the argument that the loyalists will make is this is not a time to have a leadership election. It's an argument I think that Lucy Powell, the deputy leader, makes because, as the Prime Minister said, in fact, in his St George's Day message today, he said we've got the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, and also various other problems at home. And of course, the Labour Party are very conscious of the fact that your party, the Tories, went through Prime Ministers regularly every few years, and they don't want to repeat that.
No, they don't. Well, thinking back to John Major, he was really an outside bet, wasn't he, when he became...
well, he came through the middle, and that's why I think possibly someone we haven't thought of, the dark horse candidate, like, say, John Healey or Yvette Cooper might come through.
Well, John McDonnell was sat there saying it's not the right time, and that seems to be the consensus, especially with what might or might not happen in a couple of weeks. We played you the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood at the top of the show. Let's listen to what some other government ministers have been saying about Keir Starmer and his handling of the Mandelson scandal today, starting with Ed Miliband.
You said there that you stayed clear of Peter Mandelson when you were Labour leader. What went through your mind when you saw he'd been appointed as US ambassador?
Well, that it could blow up, that it could go wrong.
Did you say that to anyone?
I had a conversation with David Lammy about it before the appointment, and I said I was worried about it. I do want to say one thing, though, which is...
What did David Lammy say then?
Well, I think he was worried about it.
Look at the body language there, Ollie, doesn't it?
I thought that was... I mean, I watched that at the time it went out, and I just thought it was an extraordinary interview.
Yeah.
And the way Ed Miliband was answering those questions was... you know, it's unique and different, isn't it? But, you know, kind of I hang out in the Lords, I'm a member there, and what I've been astonished by for some considerable time is how those ones that you think are archetypal Blairite kind of loyalist types are actually saying he is toast, he is done. And I found it surprising just how strongly felt it is from quite a lot of Labour, you know, kind of people who are, you know, kind of quite senior in the Labour Party.
Well, there's a lot of ex-ministers in the Lords, ex-Labour ministers from the Blair and Brown era.
Yeah, yeah.
We are not done. Michelle, we'll get your thoughts on the next one. This was the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones, when he was asked about a culture of fear in Downing Street by politicos and McElvoy.
Not clear from what I heard yesterday from the Prime Minister that he regrets the way, the culture that Ollie Robbins described, which is a kind of personal fiefdom, perhaps a favouritism, even a recklessness in the operation.
Again, I wasn't in the building at the time, so I can't speak to it contemporaneously, but my experience of being in Number 10, especially with the officials that support and serve the Prime Minister, is that their job is to support the Prime Minister to get the job done and to make sure that these things are being done properly. Now, there were serious process failings here, there's no denying that.
Given that he was such a good inquisitor when he was running, I think it was the Business Select Committee, wasn't he? When he's on the receiving end, you can see some of the technique. I wasn't there. I can't speak contemporaneously. That old chestnut. What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, it is that. But also, he's relied on the process again.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to ditch this process argument because actually, to all intents and purposes, a key part of the argument that Ollie Robbins used was he meticulously followed the process and yet he got the sack. So they can't hide behind that anymore. But I think what the Prime Minister has really done that is a grave mistake is he's boxed himself in on saying that Ollie Robbins had to go because he made this grave error of judgment. That is exactly what Keir Starmer has done throughout this entire process. We can't ignore the fact that the ethics advice, the due diligence, gave massive neon warning signs to the Prime Minister. He knew Mandelson's history.
Yeah.
He would have been alerted to the media press stories. He knew about his career and his outside interests. He knew all of this. It was no secret. So it's almost laughable to say, but actually, if I'd have got this other one piece of paper, I'd have completely changed my mind, even though the King had signed it off and America knew about it. That would have definitely been the point.
This one next was the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, in the Commons when asked about Number 10 trying to find an ambassadorial job for spin doctor Matthew Doyle.
I was the Home Secretary at the time that I understand this has taken place, so I was not involved and don't know the circumstances. I am, of course, extremely concerned at any suggestion that the Permanent Secretary or Permanent Undersecretary of the Foreign Office would be told not to inform the Foreign Secretary. I can also confirm that the case that he raised, it would not have been an appropriate appointment as well.
So, John, not exactly circling the wagons around the Prime Minister, more a load of people going, nothing to do with me.
Yeah, I mean, the Matthew Doyle revelation, that came from Ollie Robbins at the Select Committee on Tuesday. I must admit, my jaw dropped when I heard that. I mean, listen, Matthew Doyle, I mean, we all remember, I remember him, he was a fairly junior press officer in the Blair years, and then he comes back as head of the press operation in Number 10. And the idea that someone like that is qualified to become an ambassador, you think, what? And then in Prime Minister's questions, it was a Tory MP called Mike Wood who raised it, the very first question. And the PM didn't deny it at all. He just said, well, you know, when people leave the public service, you know, we look for jobs for them. And that is extraordinary as well. And, of course, Matthew Doyle is controversial because he supported a candidate in an election in Scotland for local government who had, I think, either a conviction or accusations of...
He went on to be convicted, I think.
I think he was...
Yeah, he was convicted after the campaigning, but the allegations and the charges were already underway.
Let's leave that detail there. Matthew Doyle, in fairness to him, said he knew nothing about this being asked on his behalf.
He said he did not seek the appointment.
No.
And he was probably as bemused as anyone, this idea that he should be considered for an ambassador's job.
Still in the laws, but without the whip. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up in a moment, the leaked health data of 500,000 Brits is, guess what, put up for sale on a Chinese website.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Next, the medical data of around 500,000 British people gathered for a health study in the UK has now been offered for sale on a website in China. The government says the listings have been taken down, but called the breach unacceptable. Our science and technology editor Tom Clark reports.
When it comes to data breaches, they don't get much bigger or more sensitive. Detailed medical information of 500,000 volunteers in the UK Biobank project were found advertised for sale on Chinese web store Alibaba. Not a hack, it appears individuals from 3 Chinese academic institutions who'd signed contracts to access the data sought to try and sell it, expressly forbidden by the contract.
It's extremely frustrating because we make the data available to bona fide researchers who we have vetted very carefully, who enter into a legally binding agreement with us that they will only use the data for health-related research. And when you have a couple of rogue actors who abuse that, then that makes it puts a bad name on the entire global scientific community.
I'm going to start with the ultrasound, both sides of your neck.
OK. Starting in 2006, UK Biobank recruited 500,000 volunteers to the world's largest and longest-running medical research project. Participants who are now aged between 55 and 90 come from all over the UK. The project has allowed tens of thousands of scientists worldwide to make thousands of new and important discoveries in conditions like heart disease, cancer and dementia. Data shared by volunteers and now offered for sale includes gender, year and month of birth, medical history, lifestyle and mental health information, as well as results from tests on millions of biological samples of blood, saliva and DNA stored in the biobank. According to the Chinese government and Alibaba, links to the data have been removed and none was sold, nor did it contain names, addresses, phone or NHS numbers, but theoretically detailed enough for identification of a few participants by bad actors.
The chances of this turning something is probably quite small. But if you are that 1 in a 500,000 person who gets blackmailed for this, this is not good. And the whole point is we shouldn't even be talking about this. We should be so far away from this point.
UK Biobank has suspended all access to its data while it puts in restrictions to prevent future downloads and apologised to its participants. The data and time they volunteered so valuable, it should be shared with the right people and not hawked online by the wrong ones. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Ollie and Michelle, so we'll move my panel for this evening. And Michelle, you know, your last job in government was Secretary of State for Science, Tech and Innovation. Yeah. You've been to the biobank, you know all about it. So when you heard about this, it's not a leak, is it? Because these institutions, 3 of them in China, were allowed to apply and get hold of the data. So somehow it's got out. But what do you make of this?
So I think this is really worrying for a number of reasons. First of all, you've got to remember this whole database is built around volunteers who have come forward and given their medical data. Yeah. So this will detract and discourage people from participating in clinical trials or research studies in the future, which is a big worry. And secondly, because data is nowadays a critical infrastructure. It's the fuel, if you like, for our technology and our AI. And what this does is it shows that the UK is lacking in terms of its security mechanisms when it comes to data. And if you look at the healthcare system in particular, data holds so much potential to be able to cure cancer and other kind of diseases by spotting patterns. And we're really far behind other places in the world in terms of use of data when it comes to our healthcare system, like the Middle East. And this is going to discourage it even further.
In terms of using it behind the world, in terms of the data set itself that the NHS has, it's the envy of the world, Ollie. And then, therefore, situations like this raise questions about other deals the government has done, one being Palantir for £330 million, creating that NHS database. Now, I know they tend to watch and tend to comment on what people say about them. They've certainly done that to Zach Polanski on social media in the past day or so.
Yeah.
but people have concerns that third parties are getting hold of this data, whoever they happen to be.
And Palantir have published recently a manifesto on X, which is just the most bizarre, you know, kind of screechy 22,000 words of a manifesto, which makes one feel very insecure about an organisation of that nature. I mean, we were certainly looking at this years ago when AI first came on the horizon, because, of course, you're absolutely right. What we have uniquely in the UK is the NHS. Now, anyone who's a regular user might be doubtful that there's a whole welter of easily accessible data, especially when you go in for an appointment and no one's got your record or whatever. But at the same time, the potential to make use of that for good using machine learning is fantastic, you know, is extraordinary.
Yeah.
But the safeguards and the safety around people's identity is absolutely fundamental.
Michelle, quickly.
So I think on the whole, data is used sensibly and securely. I think the NHS doesn't hold that treasure chest that we present when you pick apart, and it needs to, but that's about changing the perceptions around data use, especially in the healthcare industry, and this today does not help because the culture in the UK is very anti it, and we need to take people on a journey, and this is taking us backwards, not forwards.
Biobank, the CEO, said they've tightened up security since this happened. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up in a moment after the break, riot police to patrol French beaches, British riot police that is, in a new deal to stop small boat crossings.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Bangkok. We've been undercover inside Asia's huge network of scam centres.
This compound is, without a doubt, the worst. It is essentially hell on earth.
We cover a vast, varied and dynamic region that's shaping the rest of the world. Okay, there's a lot of firing going on.
Can you explain to me why? We're journalists, eh?
Let's go. Watch way. Right, we're going to get in. Right, get in. Get in.
We just want to ask you a few questions about your involvement with ISIS. Next step for them quite often is getting on a boat and sailing illegally over into Europe.
Es un solo procesamiento, una sola sacada.
Oh my goodness. Whoa, oh my goodness. If you weren't affected, you'd be a bit of a strange person.
Turn off the camera, turn around and go away.
Okay, but
listen, I told you 3 times.
They saw 2 guys, 2 bad people.
There's an absolutely packed dinghy.
that is what it's like. Sometimes you have to put in an awful lot of hard work. It's worth doing. I suppose it is what we do.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'll always remember going into Gaza City during the war, and all around us was destruction and the sound of battle. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Middle East correspondent.
British riot police are going to be sent to French beaches as part of a new more than £600 million deal agreed between the UK and France to try to stop people crossing the channel in small boats. For the first time, ministers say they could take some of the money back from France if not enough boats are stopped with this. Our Europe correspondent Alistair Bunkle has more.
We don't have any food, anything. We just try to get food there. So it's difficult. UK have more options for immigrants, that's why.
That was Hassan, an Eritrean hoping to make it from this beach across to the UK within the next month or two.
But the British government today has signed a new deal to try and prevent people like Hassan from making that journey.
A big chunk of the new money that we have promised is in a flexible fund where I've been very clear we will fund only the things that we believe are going to work in order to disrupt and drive down the number of boat crossings. So the totality of this package is a huge improvement on what's gone before. It's a landmark deal and I'm very pleased to be able to sign it today.
The deal is worth £662 million over 3 years. That money will go to providing 50 more riot police to patrol the beaches, and new surveillance and drone technology to monitor the coastline. But it comes with a condition. £100 million of it could be withdrawn after a year if the British government doesn't think that the French are making enough progress.
People will still make the journey, you think?
Of course. They try, but it will be more difficult when we compare to the past days.
This is one of the main camps. We're about, I don't know, a mile or two inland, and you can kind of see the infrastructure. There's lots of portaloos here. The people in yellow high-vis jackets are charities here to hand out food. Some of those orange life vests waiting for the next moment when the winds die down and people can try and make that crossing. And when they do, they'll go from here, they'll walk towards the beaches in the middle of the night, under darkness, and then try and cross into the UK.
These deterrence policies are just putting more people at risk and increasing the risk, and we're leaving people into the hands of everything that can happen at the border, which is smuggling, trafficking. It's not actually decreasing the crossings.
Interesting, talking to some of the charities here, they just don't think that these policies work or will work because they say that most people here have an option. One is to remain in their home countries where they face the risk of torture or imprisonment or death. The other alternative is to come here where, yeah, sure, they face the risk of French riot police, treatment by smugglers, and of course the real risks of trying to cross the English Channel. But by comparison, the risks they face here aren't as bad as the risks they face back home. And so that is why people, in their opinion, will still keep coming to northern France to try and make that trip across to the UK.
Somalia to Yemen, dangerous. Yemen to Sudan, dangerous. Libya to Araba, dangerous. Here on UK, dangerous.
So far this year, around 6,000 migrants have made it across the Channel to the UK. That's actually 36% fewer than this time last year. But the summer months which are coming are when, of course, the winds are calmer and the sea is less rough. And so the next few months will provide an immediate test for this new deal.
We're going to discuss this now with Madeleine Sumption, Director of the Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford. Madeleine, it's good to see you. What's your reaction to what the government has announced today in terms of this deal with France?
Well, I think in some respects it's more of the same. So they're talking about sort of increasing the number of people patrolling. That's something that has been going on, obviously, for a few years now. The impact of that, actually, I wouldn't say the impact has been nothing. I think if there were no police patrolling the beaches, there would be more people coming across. It makes it harder. And when it becomes harder and more dangerous, that does put some people off doing it. I think the underlying challenge here is really difficult. We're talking about this very long coastline. Often when we have enforcement, what you see is that people divert to other areas. So it's very hard to predict what the impact of this will be. I think the bits of it to watch are there's a promise of more interceptions in the water. And that's something that the French said a few months ago that in theory they would start doing, but hasn't really been happening at any scale. And they say they're going to do more of that. And there is some evidence that that could have an impact on crossings. And then the other piece is they're talking about detaining people and trying to remove them from the beaches. Currently, what happens is that if there's a thwarted attempt, if people are trying to cross, they get in a boat and then they're stopped by the police. They're not necessarily removed. They would just go back into the surrounding areas and then try again. And so the hope that the government has is that by setting up more of a process of trying to detain and remove people, that will have an impact on that. Although it doesn't look initially like the numbers would be particularly large, but again, just very difficult to predict the overall impacts, I think.
I mean, looking at our graph on the screen, you can see numbers up and down, slightly on the decline, I suppose. We heard in that piece from Ali, 36% down on the same time last year. But then again, the weather is pretty good at the moment, and that tends to have an impact on people crossing boats. Madeleine, the other thing is, people will remember all this stuff by slogans, stop the boats, and one of them being smash the gangs. What happened to that? That doesn't seem to have worked, that idea by Labour.
That is true. The gangs are not smashed. And part of the challenge here, there has been more investment in some of that sort of policing and intelligence work. So I think there's been quite a lot of activity, which can lead to, we don't have great data, but to track it over time, but that you would expect that to lead to more prosecutions. The challenge here is that the gangs are very decentralized. It's not like there's sort of one or two gangs that run the whole thing with a single kingpin and you take out that person and it all collapses, right? This is a market. There are a lot of people who are really desperate to make the crossing, and they're willing to pay money to do it. And there are lots of people who could move in to fill the space if a gang member or a particular gang gets taken down. So I think it's just when you're talking about, it's an illegal market like many others that the government would like to crack down on, like the markets on drugs, for example. And it's just inherently very difficult to use enforcement alone to stop to take that market out of action.
This is in the tens of thousands likely to be for the year, as it has been in recent years. A significant number. People don't want to see this happen, but nevertheless, as a percentage of overall net migration, it's a pretty small number. And net migration itself, well, that's coming down too. So that's likely to affect the political discourse. A year ago, it was all anyone was talking about. Now, it certainly doesn't seem to be the case.
That's right. So we're talking about a few percent here of overall migration to the UK. There was a period when UK migration was unusually high just after the post-Brexit system. That's now coming down. We could actually enter a period of temporarily even lower net migration by historical standards. Some people are talking about, getting below 100,000 or possibly even lower than that. If that happens, I think it will be temporary. The sort of modelling that we've done suggests that what you see is that there's a sort of a downward split because you've got a lot of people who arrived under the post-Brexit immigration system and are now starting to leave, with immigration still quite low, but it's sort of due to bounce back again, maybe just in time for the 2029 election.
Interesting timing. Interesting that it could be in the tens of thousands, because there were many prime ministers being non-committal saying, well, it'll be in the tens of thousands, and finally it might be the case. Madeleine Sumption, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Welcome.
You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up in a moment, we'll look at what could be lost when this session of Parliament ends next week, and it could include the assisted dying bill.
With respect, Minister, answer the question.
It's you. Hello and welcome, I'm Cathy Newman.
So could the outcome of these elections be manipulated?
New me, new show, new furniture.
Hard news needs a hard chair.
I feel like I'm in therapy.
Oh, there's room for two on this one. Do you think people will take me seriously with my feet up?
Sorry, madam, but we're closing now.
Oh, sorry. Sofa sorted. Let's get this show on the road.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy? It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat. It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island.
The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre.
The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin. Jerry, any comments on the judge's decisions? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end of a 52-day trial.
Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris.
Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland. Sky News, get the full story first. There's an expectation that Parliament will be prorogued on Tuesday. That's the formal end of the parliamentary session. Now, any bills which have not been given royal assent could be lost unless they are specifically carried over. And that will include the legislation on assisted dying. The private members' bill brought by Kim Leadbeater was passed by the Commons but is still being debated in the Lords and will not now become law. Campaigner Esther Ranson accused peers of sabotage. Let's take a look at some of the other significant bills. John, talk us through what's happening with them, the Hillsborough law being a prominent one.
Yes, its full title is the... well, I'll tell you what, just before I talk about that, let's talk about one from a few weeks ago. Okay. Because the Diego Garcia bill...
Oh, yes.
Now that, if you remember, I think it was back in February or March, that the government paused it, and last week they basically hoisted the white flag because Stephen Doughty, the Foreign Office Minister, said no, shelved. Of course, what they are blaming President Trump, who called it an act of gross stupidity. So that is shelved indefinitely. Hillsborough, now that is the Public Office Accountability Bill, the so-called Hillsborough Law. Now, this is one that the supporters of that say should have been gone through ages ago. It was held up because the spooks wanted exemption from this bill. Last week, the Prime Minister said he was personally committed to it. They were going to do it. And it came up again today in the Commons. Ian Byrne, a Liverpool MP who was there, was pressing Alan Campbell, the minister, and he said that that would be carried over, that bill, because the other Prime Minister has made so many pledges on that. Yeah. Now, schools. This is give it its full title, it's Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. This has been held up over a row over social media. Yeah. Tories forcing through, with Lib Dem support, I think, and crossbench, yeah, a ban on social media for under 16s. On Monday of this week, the government had announced a bit of a concession on banning phones in classrooms in the hope that the Lib Dems and the Tories might back down, but they haven't. And the last one, I think I'm right in saying, the Crime and Policing Bill, this is all about violence against women, knife crime, and so on. Now, these bills are going to go back to these bills are going to be back in the Commons on Monday. Ping pong, as we call it, has been going on for weeks, and the Labour people in the Lords will tell you that it's all the fault of these pesky Lib Dems and these pesky Tories who are trying to keep the business going, delay prorogation beyond Tuesday so that the Prime Minister has to face another Prime Minister's questions.
Right. Let's speak to Ollie Grenda and Michelle Donlan about that. Ollie, what do you think? Well, you can respond to John there.
Honestly, the last thing on the minds of peers as they do their line-by-line scrutiny of legislation is the issue of Prime Minister's questions. This is about asserting and inserting into, say, the Crime and Police Bill, really important things like additional restrictions on something like, there's this big old thing called crime waste, which is cropping up, which, by the way, is a massive thing with organised crime gangs dumping on huge sites like Kidlington. We saw the scandal of that one. Or profitability of, it's kind of about raising profit for fining, which is disproportionate. It is about also the social media and telephones issue. this is a classic moment when you're getting to the end of the session and frankly, you do quite a lot of trading and horse trading and you get some of your changes into the bill at the last minute. Now, obviously, the Diego Garcia one was gone, and it was a bad bill anyway, and it was also, the negotiations were started by James Cleverly back in 22. I mean, it's always been a problem. The assisted dying one is the one that I think is really heartbreaking for people.
Yeah, we will come on to that. Michelle, briefly, in terms of what was being said about the way the Lords behave in general on this stuff. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think that the primary function of the Lords is to do that detailed legislative scrutiny, and it is important that that happens. So some of it is shenanigans and some of it is actually, you know, part of the correct procedure. So it's a bit of I can see both sides here.
Because you sometimes hear from them that they're getting stuff that's just badly written, potential legislation.
I think they do use that line.
They use that line. It's a line, is it?
Yeah,
Okay, it's an excuse. Okay.
Just big up there.
Ollie, you mentioned the assisted dying bill.
Yeah.
Let's focus on that because, look, there will be people who are for it. Esther Ranson, of course, I'm sure Kim Leadbeater feels upset about that right now, who think that Lords dragging their heels have caused this.
Well, I personally think that the Lords should have taken the lead from the Commons and not mugged down this bill. Now, by the way, I have sat and listened every Friday with one exception to the debates on this. I haven't spoken because I didn't want to delay the process of the bill.
Because there were some big sessions on this, weren't there?
But the number of, and it's a little bit, you know, kind of, committee stages should be specific, very, very specific and brief. And instead what we've had is lots and lots and lots of lengthy speeches. So I think the criticism of the Lords on this, or those Lords who have spent a long time and deliberately so, I think is a fair criticism.
Well, I'm going to defend the Lords here because if you look at some of the amendments that they were putting down, they were sensible things that were safeguards, like exempting pregnant women, for instance. And let's not forget...
Are you for assisted
I'm
dying?
against assisted dying, right? Because I think you've got to take a step back and think about the magnitude of this piece of legislation and the fact that it could end up the thin end of the wedge. And look at what's happened in other countries. It starts off with very good intentions, very clear safeguards, and then you end up with a situation where the state is abdicating its role on mental health, and those people are then eligible to take this pathway. It's a very dangerous route, and I would be an advocate of a referendum if we were going to do something like this.
Wow, okay.
It wasn't even in the manifesto of the Labour Party. I think it is a monumental thing to do.
But it's
It is very risky.
It's not a government bill.
Well, quite. That's why I don't think it should be pursued at all, myself, without a referendum.
Moral issues often end up having to be private members' bills. So I remember when, David Steele introduced...
Famously,
the abortion bill as a young lawyer, a young MP, and it is because moral issues, it's very hard for governments to introduce these issues that are free votes. But I would say I have sat and listened to every single bit of that debate. There have been amendments that haven't been from the most logical of places, and the speeches have not been speeches in the spirit of committee stages. They have been longer speeches than they ought to have been in a committee stage of a bill.
John,
deliberately so.
Because it is a private member's bill, just heard it explained why that tends to be the case with moral issues like this. Does that mean it's done, it can't be carried over, it can't come back? What are the rules around that?
Well, it's done as far as this session is concerned. They've got one more day tomorrow, haven't they, on this?
Yeah,
and
I will be there.
It'll need somebody in the private member's ballot after the King's speech who's a big supporter, like Kim Leadbeater was. She came top of the ballot, to bring it back. And supporters are saying they will try and force it through using what's called the Parliament Act, bypassing the Lords. That'll cause a row, I should imagine. It's a hugely contentious issue. Some say the government should take it on board, but they seem reluctant to do that.
Okay, very quickly. It's the first time Parliament has debated it. There have been many legislative committees. There have been many investigations over decades. So any suggestion that this has suddenly appeared on a table is nonsense.
And it may not disappear either. Thank you for the moment. Normally at this time I would be saying goodbye and that we'll all be back on Monday. But actually, next week at 7, we launch a new daily politics programme. It is the Cathy Newman Show. And I caught up with Cathy to hear what she's got in store. Cathy Newman, welcome to Sky News.
Thanks
Great
very much.
to have you on the team.
Great to be here.
Big launch on Monday. What have you got planned at 7 o'clock?
It's so exciting. We've got so many surprises up our sleeves. I can't tell you everything right now, but we're going to have big stories, exclusive interviews, investigations coming down the track, showcasing what Sky does best, which is exclusive, premium, original journalism, and it's going to be really fun.
And you want the audience to get in touch. You want people to... How do they get in touch? What do they do?
Well, most of all, I want people to watch at 7 in the evening on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But also, yes, we're going to have this Q&A section where people can ask me questions. And I'm also going to be getting questions out of the politicians, the political pairings we're going to have on our new velvet sofa. And top flight cabinet ministers and who knows who else.
A sofa, no less. Cathy, best of luck with it.
Thanks very much.
You can see Cathy right here in Westminster from 7 o'clock on Monday. I felt a little bit underdressed there, John, because she's used to seeing male presenters in very brightly coloured ties. Have I let the team down?
Is this too bright?
No, I think that's just, that one's spot on. That one's spot on.
Well, I think the idea of the new show, and I know a bit about it, is, of course, as Cathy says, there's going to be a sofa here.
Yeah.
So we're not having a desk. It's she's going to be in like an armchair, and there's going to be a sofa here where there'll be a couple of guests. And sometimes I will squeeze on the end.
You will squeeze on. But if this desk is going spare, I may take it back to Barbet Towers. Ollie, Michelle, great to have you with us. For the final Politics Hub, you may well appear on Cathy's show, I'm sure, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Up next, it is the UK Tonight, and it's Manish in the seat. Bye for now. Thanks for watching.